Africa's fastest economic hub, SOUQ News takes you on a journey of discovery, analyzing and reporting the facts that lay the foundation for growth and development. We don't just report the news, we create it. SOUQ News is more than a channel. It is a catalyst for change, spotlighting the stories that shape economies, inspire entrepreneurs, and fuel progress. Covering business, finance, technology, energy, and many more, SOUQ News provides a daily deep dive into the stories that matter, interviews with industry titans, and analysis that empowers your understanding of economic landscape. Join us daily as we dissect, discuss, and deliver the most relevant and factual news on business and the economy. SOUQ News is your trusted guide, empowering you with the knowledge to make informed decisions.
My name is Veronica Nkechi Eze.
Charles Abana.
My name is Professor Martins Emeje.
Professor Sylvester Odion Akaine.
Keep watching SOUQ
News TV.
The best news channel online.
It's elevating, it's enlightening, it's educating.
Muhammad Ali found his root in Africa. Rumble in the jungle. I swear the king is humble. Jesse Jackson, O.J. Simpson, this is black history. Andrew Young visit Africa in the late 60s. Legend, Bob Marley make the light different. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X are big names. They fought for black Americans in the old days. We need same revolution in our own ways. Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Mr. Jay-Z, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre and Eddie Murphy. American prosperity ain't complete with African poverty. It's legendary Idris Abdul Karim, and you are on to SOUQ News. You don't.
Broad Street. Broad Street, situated in Lagos Island, is steeped in Nigerian history. Once the biggest financial hub of the country, it housed the headquarters of major banks, linked the CBN, the stock exchange, and the loads of lender companies. Broad Street is a historically significant street. It has played a central role in the development of Lagos and history. An important commercial and administrative center for the British colonial authorities. It was also a home to some of the city's earliest modern buildings. Broad Street was a residential area in the pre-colonial era. With the British came the Methodist Boys High School in 1878 and the Broad Street Prison in 1882, renamed Freedom Park. The General Hospital, which was a British military hospital, was built in 1893. Being the first general hospital in Nigeria. The old British Secretariat building, which is now the Federal Ministry of Justice, was built in 1906. Broad Street has seen a full turn into modern commercial office blocks, complexes, skyscrapers, and markets from the outer marina through Akpombo, early into the Adeniji Adele Road. Broad Street is one of the busiest streets in Nigeria on weekdays, where commercial activities take place day and night. From modern buildings to ancient structures, this street gives one a raw dose of life in Lagos. Broad Street is often referred to as Lagos Financial District. It boasts a mix of architectural styles, reflecting its long history, colonial-era buildings, Victorian and Edwardian architectural features, alongside more modern skyscrapers and structures. Broad Street remains a vital, vibrant part of the Nigerian economy. Broad Street. SOUQ Enlightenment.
I'm okay.
My name is Raymond Bola Brown.
Hi, my name is Fred Amata, and you are on to SOUQ News.
If you are watching this channel for the first time, make sure you continue to watch it because this is SOUQ News.
Shout out to SOUQ News. Actually, I don't know. I really enjoyed the little moment I spent with you, and I think with more of this.
SOUQ News. Here's the SOUQ News, who had the courage to transcend a locked-off camera and actually have a conversation with a human being. It's a pleasure, SOUQ News. Thank you very much.
The Three Wise Men. Iconic sculptures and statues adorn major metropolitan cities of the world. In Lagos, Nigeria, the statue of three men designed to depict the state's cultural heritage and to usher in visitors and tourists into the ever-accommodating center of excellence is in no doubt an astounding work of art. originally built under the administration of Colonel Raji Rasaki, designed by Bodu Shodende in 1991, and standing over 12 feet high, referred to as Agba Meta or Aro Meta. The three sculptured chiefs were placed along the Lagos-Ibadan toll gate to welcome people coming into Lagos State. The statue called the Three Wise Men by many has become a major signature for the state. Three white-capped chiefs clad in white wrappers, knotted across their shoulders and with clenched right fists are shown in the artwork. The images fascinate and create impressions in the minds of visitors coming into the state, captivating the attention of visitors who look with keen interest, pondering on the messages which the posture of the engraved images signifies. The Three Wise Men has been relocated thrice from its original position at Ojodu Berger end of Lagos-Ibadan Expressway to Magodo area before its final relocation to its present site at Olowo Drive. The sculpture has suffered severe damages over the years and renovated. Bodu Shodende, through this sculpture, depicted the highest honor that can be afforded to anyone in the Eko greeting tradition. The Three Wise Men, Arometa, SOUQ Enlightenment.
Hello and welcome to SOUQ Pulse. It's my pleasure to be here and know fully well that you are on the other side, logged in, watching from different parts of the globe and being a part of this conversation this beautiful afternoon. My name is Chuks, John-Rogers Chuks, and today we'll go straight into our topic. You know what SOUQ Pulse is all about. There is no need of starting that a bit short, lengthy introduction. It's SOUQ Pulse, and today we are bringing this just like we do it, very close home to Africa. And we are looking at the African Development Bank. Yes, you heard me right, African Development Bank. And we're asking this straightforward question. How African focused is the African Development Bank? This particular institution, the agreement to establish it was on the 4th of August, 1963 in Khartoum, Sudan. Each time we get to hear Sudan right now, we remember the crisis in that particular place. Sad, but yes, it's all about interest. Interest that we know majorly is not theirs. Interest from people outside causing those sort of conflict. And it came into force on the 10th of September 1964 with headquarters in Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan to be precise. And we know Nigeria is the highest shareholder, followed by a country that is not part of the 54 local nations in Africa. But hey, we won't go that far. So today we'll be looking at the African Development Bank, and we'll ask these direct questions. How African is African Development Bank? I have our guest here with us, Mr. Sam. Good afternoon. You're welcome to SOUQ Pulse.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, for those that might not know, Mr. Sam has written extensively on African Development Bank in the past, and he's bringing that wealth of experience here. And if you've watched this particular program for a while, you will 100% agree with me that he not just only believes in Africa, he believes in policies across Africa, Asia that are formulated for good, with good intention, and not just with good intention that are applicable, working well. Sir, you're welcome to SOUQ Pulse.
A pleasure.
Okay. So first things first, let's go back and ask the question from our topic. Is African Development Bank Africa focused?
Thank you very much indeed. Incidentally, 2024 will make it 60 years that the African Development Bank has been operating in terms of providing development for the continent. Are they African focused? Yes, they are indeed African focused. The politics of it, where you talk about some other shareholder of the bank, if the conversation will go down in direction, we may speak to some of those international politics that try to play out in the running of the bank. But in terms of its development agenda, from formation in 1963 to the actual banking relation, we started in 1964. This year, the African Development Bank will be celebrating its 60th anniversary. And I'm sure when it gets to that month, they will roll off some of the major achievements in terms of development that they have brought to Africa. In terms of its agenda by the founding fathers, to a very large extent, in my view, has achieved some development projects across Africa, but the degree of this development and the benefits to the citizens, maybe as we progress this conversation, we're able to speak to specific issues directly.
Okay. Yeah, the African Development Bank is comprised of 3 entities: the African Development Bank itself, then you have the African Development Fund, then you have the Nigerian Trust Fund. Yes. And now, their source of funding comes majorly from the member countries, then some other business they do with other multilateral organizations. Now, let's go straight into, this is majorly going to be more of a question and answer, agree and disagree kind of discussion today. So now, to what extent can we say that factors outside Africa, the Bretton Woods organizations, countries outside Africa, to what extent can we say that they have influenced the African Development Bank over the years?
Sadly, at formation, there are other non-African countries who are major shareholders. If you see it from that perspective, some of the policy initiative of the African Development Bank, to a very large extent, has been influenced by some other shareholder. And there was a case in point in 2020 when there was a need to re-elect Akiwumi, the current president and CEO of the bank. Donald Trump of the United States of America made some attempt to frustrate his re-elections, and there were certain issues that has to do with due diligence in the recruitment processes, which the chairperson of the bank has said that within the corporate governance framework of the African Development Bank, there were no infraction into those processes of recruitment. So that underscores the negative impact from outside who are shareholder of the bank. But if you look at it within the development framework in Africa, in the last 60 years, I think African Development Bank has provided some concession loans to the 54 African countries.
Okay, let's keep it strictly on the influence from outside, because we get to see on a regular basis, we get to see, be it the other banks from outside of this continent, they wield their powers through either policies, agree with us or not agree with us. They wield their powers to get something done to favor the major shareholders of those particular banks. So that's what we are looking at right now. Yes, you've answered this particular one to some extent. Now let's look at the IMF, let's look at the World Bank. Do you think there is some kind of overriding influence, interest over the African Development Bank?
Not overriding influence to the extent to which you are raising the questions. Those influences are there, but what needs to be seen is to what extent the president and the chief executive of the bank take some of those pressures that come from the international institutions, particularly the Bretton Woods institutions that a lot of people have been clamoring for, particularly in Africa, that they need to re-engineer those banks to meet with modern development needs. I think some of those institutions, in my view, have outlived their youthfulness. At the time of formation,
about the World Bank?
Yes, I'm talking about the Bretton Woods institutions.
Now, we are not shareholders there, so how can we be clamoring for?
No, we're not talking about, no. Once you are a sovereign nation and you are a member of the United Nations, by implication, your membership is already guaranteed.
Your membership, yes.
But the point I'm making, the role of
the shareholder.
Yeah, the role of the Big Five. I'm talking about the Bretton Woods institution. You're talking about external influence.
Yes, yes.
I'm saying for that influence to be reduced tremendously, there's a need to reform those institutions, particularly their role in terms of trying to influence the development paradigm of African nations. There is too much politics with the IMF, the World Bank, the other one that gives, what do you call them? There's international, anyway, I'll recall the name, I just went offhand. But the point I'm trying to underscore here, they have influence, they continue to have influence. So if you don't have courageous and strategic leaders at the helm of these regional institutions in Africa, then that problem will continue to stare at our face. So
okay, let's redirect this now. Should we look at trying to look for restructuring or structuring in whatever form for those particular Bretton Woods institutions, or we should look forward to having African leaders come together as a bloc and support African Development Bank?
No, Africa is already a bloc.
Yes, but how strong is their voice with the bank?
No, we're not going to even talk about voice in the bank. The point is that this is your regional bank. And for you to do well in terms of how you set it up in the first instance is for development, 100%. Where you get concession loan to develop the 54 countries that make up Africa.
So what level of support?
No, the point I'm making is that the architecture and means that the project that is critical to Nigeria is different from a project that will be critical to Ethiopia. So they lend based on specific demands from the countries, but they have a framework that supports basic development policies in each of these countries, which is drawn based on the shareholding capacity of the shareholder. So, for example, the percentage of what Nigeria can draw is greater than that of Ethiopia, that of Ghana, based on the structure.
Based on your point and your shareholding.
Yeah, but beyond that, there are other frameworks.
Okay. Now, you've gone to what a country can draw. Now, let's go back to, I'm going to ask you this question. It's not, when I ask you this question, your answer will now determine if I'll go to the next one. Do you subscribe to borrowing to fund national budget?
Yes, to a very large extent. If that borrowing will support the welfare of the citizen.
When we say it to support the welfare of the citizen, it's still a broad answer.
No,
because
I'm trying to lay a background.
Okay, background.
I always like to lay a background before I go into specifics so that we don't lose the essence of the discourse. The point I'm making is that if a country is challenged, and we can take an example of Ghana, is in the public domain, so we can speak to it. They have problem with IMF, and they are overexposed as a country. Why they are trying to do negotiation to reschedule their loan portfolio, and it's difficult for citizens to have a square meal. So if a development bank is there and there's an open window where the government can draw down some money to fund a provision of basic services, that, in my view, should be allowed. But If you look at it,
not depending on borrowing to fund.
Yes.
Okay.
On the other hand,
okay,
because of the challenge of corruption and bad governance in Africa, in my view, when you now go to those banks for bailout, what did you do with the money?
Did you call it bailout?
Yes.
Okay. Now, on this point of bailout, in 2017, giving an example in Nigeria right now, in 2017, the African Development Bank approved a loan of 1 billion for the Buhari administration. Now, the first tranche of 600 million was given, but the second tranche, they refused. They stopped that particular facility. Reason that the administration did not keep to the agreement that the loan was approved for in the first place. They used the loan directly to go fund some specific project. Now, unlike what we see with the Bretton Woods organizations, I don't know if you get where I'm going to. Once they are giving the loan, they are giving the loan. Even if they are the ones that the loan is going to be spent on, or if it's their own activities, or if it's their own consultants. Once that loan is going, that loan is going. But we are seeing a kind of something different with the African Development Bank. At this point, will you advise African nations or say, okay, those within the African Development Bank, if you were able to do this to your biggest shareholder, then let this be a standard? What will you tell them? Okay, going forward, whether it is approved or not approved, as long as there's a default in carrying out those agreements, those loans should be seen to the later to be used for what it's meant for.
Anyway, whether they are continental institutions, whether they are regional institutions, whether they are global institutions, they are basic lending principles. And before any drawdown on any loan facility, whether they are concessionary loan, whether they are commercial loans, there are condition precedent on the drawdown. So if you don't hear in the public domain sometime that these Bretton Woods institutions do not even come out in the public, there are certain elements in the loan offer. When the loan becomes problematic, they will raise red flags. But then some of them may not be in the public domain. So what African Development Bank did in 2017 precisely was that these specific loans were designed for specific projects. So over 60% of that money was released. But when they do their diligence in terms of how those monies were disbursed and were used for those specific projects, there were gaps that were not in line with the lending principles of the African Development Bank. So they deprive the country of the remaining 40%, which is a wise thing to do because these monies are meant for specific developments.
And will be paid back?
Yes, of course you will pay back, but they are concessionary loan for development. So the African Development did extremely well by operating their corporate governance issues in terms of lending. So if I understand you correctly, that principles must be adhered to by even other regional institutions that has lending capacity for development so that the money is not filtered away for political expediency, which more often than not happens when you take lending from these development banks. So that is a wise decision, and it's recommended that even commercial banks and some other micro-lending institutions must find a way to get their money in. And once there's an infraction into the process trying to recover your loan, once certain element of the drawdown has been established and you are not satisfied when you do your monitoring and evaluation, then don't lend further.
Okay, we are going on a break, but before we go on a break, I want to ask you this quick one. Very short answer. How political is African Development Bank?
No, every institution, because that institution is not independent of the countries that brought that institution into existence. Therefore, there's politics at the level of corporate governance, there's politics at the executive level, There's politics are those who oversight the bank. So what we should be speaking about, what level of emotional intelligence do the operators of the bank has in managing shareholders, in managing the political environment, in managing even the politics of appointment.
This was supposed to be a very short answer, but are you trying to say that there are vested interests?
Naturally, there's always a vested interest. Okay. It's your ability to manage that vested interest that is important. There's always a vested interest. Okay. Because people always protect their interests. Okay,
we are going on a break. Before we talk about more on this vested interest, which we are all concerned about. Before we talk more about this, don't go anywhere. SOUQ Pulse will be right back.
My name is Yinka Babalola.
My name is Ijoma Pelokoro.
My name is Joshua Hassan.
I am Rotarian or Mosunde Lawson.
It's Ife Yunwarita Ejeze. My friends call me Ife.
My name is Rotarian Lola Dare.
I'm inviting you to keep watching SOUQ News. It's the right station to tune to.
I like SOUQ News. SOUQ News is good.
I want to charge you all to listen to SOUQ News, watch the news. You can have unlimited news, first time.
Find SOUQ News. Be with SOUQ News. Never switch off. You are better for it. SOUQ News is the real thing.
Listen to their coverage and you'll be glad you did.
Turn to your YouTube, turn to your Instagram, turn to all your digital channels and look for SOUQ News.
Keep watching.
Keep watching.
Please, guys, keep watching.
SOUQ News.
Lateef Jakande. Born Lateef Kayode Jakande in the Egbetedo area of Lagos Island, Lagos State, on July 1929. He studied at the Lagos Public School at Enuowa, Lagos Island, then at Bonham Memorial Methodist School, Port Harcourt, King's College, enrolled at Ilesha Grammar School, where he edited a literary paper called The Quarterly Mirror. Jakande began a career in journalism in 1949 with a daily service and joined the Nigerian Tribune in 1953. The owner, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, appointed Jakande editor-in-chief of the Tribune in 1956. Jakande established John West Publications in 1975 after leaving Tribune and began to publish the Lagos News. He served as the first president of the Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria, NPAN. Jakande ran for election as executive governor of Lagos State in 1979 on the Unity Party of Nigeria platform. His administration was effective and open and implemented the cardinal policies of his party. He introduced housing and educational programs targeting the poor, building new neighborhood primary and secondary schools, and providing free primary and secondary education. He gave poor people's children education, and many of them are now very prominent in the society today. Jakande established the Lagos State University and constructed over 30,000 housing units. After the military takeover in 1983, Jakande was charged, prosecuted, and convicted of treason and later pardoned. He served as Minister of Works under the Sani Abacha military regime. He died in Lagos on February 11, 2021. Lateef Jakande was the first civilian governor of Lagos State. Lateef Kayode Jakande, SOUQ Enlightenment.
Yes, welcome back. It's still SOUQ Pulse, and we are looking at African Development Bank, and we are asking this straightforward question: how Africa-focused, how African-eccentric is African Development Bank? And Mr. Sam has been doing justice, a lot of justice, to African Development Bank. I almost tried asking if he was part of the shareholders. I remember he's just one person. So now let's look at it from another angle.
I'm part of the shareholder. I'm a Nigerian.
Oh, okay. You heard him. Okay. Now let's look at China is the biggest lender when it comes to infrastructure funding. And they are not only funding, they go ahead and construct. That is one of their styles in funding that we've seen over a long period of time across Africa. Now, they grew that portfolio from something well insignificant to right now, everyone, the West and every other organization is eyeing them. Do you foresee African Development Bank playing in that particular sector? If African Development Bank is giving, let's take for example, Namibia or Chad or Sudan money to build an infrastructure, they are on ground. If they might not have the construction company because they are not a country, but maybe they have consultants directly with them and they are making sure that this project is done, just like China is doing. But not, well, let me not use those words, just like China is doing.
No, I think African Development Bank is already doing that in Africa. They have consultants that supervise the projects. And the loans are specific to projects. What might filter away at the end of the day may just be minimal because the monies are released in tranches. But the difference between the African Development Bank is the regulatory framework at foundation is key. So you cannot change the rule in the middle of the game. So it's a different question. So if you want the African Development Bank to use the China models of development, then you must tinker with the mandate of the bank. So you need a voting from the Continental Union, AU, to be able to effect those changes.
Okay.
But then from a foreign policy objective, China has what you call the Roads and Belt Initiative.
Good.
Which
they are
is
following judiciously.
Yeah, which is a foreign policy initiative that says, okay, we'll give you concession loan for development. As we give you these loans, you were moving the money into your environment. We will do the construction. We will support you with technical know-how while they are providing job for their people. In the last 10 years or thereabout, China has taken millions of people, over 10 million people, from poverty based on their foreign policy objective.
Now,
on these
10 million people on whose side?
On China's side.
Okay.
So why they're making development for you in terms of local employment, developing your infrastructure, they are gaining from that foreign policy initiative, which is deliberate to take their people from poverty. So if you are coming, the concession, the trucks to your country, what you may have access to is maybe if it's road, maybe some bitumen, you have the final infrastructure, you have some of the materials used for those road construction. So they bring a percentage of the workforce. So you have technicians and technologists who come over to this place. You address them as engineers. While your engineers will be working with them as technicians and technologists. Anyway, but the beauty of that foreign policy initiative, in my view, is that you see the physical infrastructure in your environment. There have been negative debates here and there, what you call the Chinese loan debt trap diplomacy. There are people who believe that the loans that come from China are overexposed and that the sovereignty of African countries that subscribe to those concession loans is at risk.
What can African Development Bank do to play in this particular sector?
He's already playing in that sector. Specifically, I told you that for the mandate or for the approach in terms of the China development model of Road and Belt Initiative that they used to bring concession loan for infrastructure development in Africa has to change. But in terms of specific concession loan to specific African countries, those loans are tied to specific projects. So if it's agric, it's
infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure problem. Okay. And those monies are released on tranches based on the level of development. So they have their template in terms of monitoring and evaluation of those projects. So when their consultant come for the feed, and if they say this is right, then they move to the next level. But again, you cannot take away the current under the table transaction, which is so more difficult challenge in Africa.
Okay, let's move this conversation further. The African Development Bank is very loud and very 100% against resource-backed loans. On several occasions, they've advised heads of state and advised governments to back down from using their resources, either for collateral or direct payment for loans. On your own side, what do you think they can do further to progress this argument of theirs?
No, I think the African leadership across board should listen to the African Development Bank. Number two, they need to close in on some of those gaps that some African countries are not able to meet up with. So if, for example, I'll be comfortable if some of those loans that are tied to products or primary products are given to the African Development Bank in terms of when you put it as a collateral to secure some of this loan, they are within the African Development Bank rather than the global north that take advantage of this primary product. I think the worry is that when you tie your development project to primary commodity, the vagaries of international pricing, in terms of cost of funds, and some of those elements that are built into the contract, forward contract arrangement, may be inimical in the final analysis to the African country that subscribe to this kind of loan. So I think that's in an advisory capacity. So therefore, leadership must listen to them to see how we can reconfigure the way we do business. And I prefer personally, in my view, that rather than even tying them to external borrowing, they should tie them within the African Development Bank.
Okay, now moving from resources, the world is talking green. The world is saying, let's transition to green energy, to green sources, 2030, 2050, 2060, whoever is moving the ball, in whatever form is happening, is a race. The nations are making money. Companies are coming out of it. Now, we're also having carbon tax. We're having negotiations. Do you think African leaders should let African Development Bank negotiate on behalf of Africa when it comes to money payment, tax payment on carbon emissions, when it comes to compensations? Do you think one body should negotiate for Africa, or each country should go and negotiate for itself? Then it becomes loud.
As a global player from the continental level, the African Development Bank, to the best of my knowledge, has a desk on climate change, climate resilience, and climate adaptation. They are playing that role in advisory capacity to various African countries that make up the shareholding of the bank. That's on the one hand. Two, the way the international system is configured currently, nations go into the United Nations to play as a sovereign nation. So there might be some difficulties, but the clamor is that those advisory that are provided by these technical institutions, government should respect their view in some cases. But there's also the international politics of climate change.
That's where I'm going to now. For a lot of these countries,
there's a politics.
A lot of their consultants are not Africans, from other organizations outside Africa.
So yeah, we can address those issues. What I actually want to address when I talked about the international policies of climate change is that the global north is pushing us so hard that we should move quickly into transitioning into renewable energy. Whereas
they are dwelling
on coal. China is still, Germany and the rest are still providing energy sources from those traditional means. So we must balance the politics of climate change in terms of what you can get in terms of reimbursement from carbon. On the other hand, you must equally develop those infrastructure that you need before you're able to transit. Even some cases, we already even have 2030, which is about 6 years away from now in terms of transitioning, where access to electricity is a major problem. But you have big mines, big deposits of coal in Nigeria, particularly along that Enugu axis that has been unexploited. I try to submit that there's a need why we embrace the various conversation, the advocacy, climate change financing, and all those options to mitigate climate change. There's a need for us to equally exploit our natural resources. So the West is not that fine boy that all things are well with, whereas they are pushing us so hard. So we must balance the politics. That's what I mean by the international politics of climate change. Some of the commitments that were made in France, that were made in Dubai, has not come into fruition. So when you look at the level of delegations that came from Africa to see how they can struggle for the financing. Anyway, the United Nations Environment Program has a few initiatives here and there that support the climate change. We can take advantage of those initiatives for the time being.
Okay, now we have 54 African countries. We have some Western and Asian nations, all part of shareholders in African Development Bank. We still have the politics. We have interest. We have those interests that are vested. Now, it begs to ask, is Africa in the
framework, whether they are institutional, whether they are business to business, whether they are individual to individual, and whether they are government to government, will benefit their citizens. I think that's the fine point of our discussion, that leadership must play in such a way that we have continued to blame the West. In the last, if we put Ghana and some other African country, in the last 65 to 67 years of independence, of this new colonial framework that drives us in the way we do things. The West has their own challenge. The leadership must find a way to see how the West has done the worst they can do. Let's have courage to change the narrative, correct some of the anomalies. The politics will be there, but when the courage is there, because like I said, nobody is really independent. So that interdependence,
not even the bank to carry out their business obligations.
Nobody is independent.
Okay, now let's bring this close to production and trade. If we look at the African Continental Free Trade Agreements and the zones and the future we are looking forward to based on this particular agreement that we pray works. Now, where do you see African Development Bank playing in this particular scene?
African Development Bank is a facilitator, an enabler for some of the conventions agreement, covenants, genuinely really trade among ourselves to meet that development clarion call for African development. And we need leadership, and we need the citizens in addressing those issues as a collective. So citizen diplomacy is very critical. That's advocacy, civic engagement, transparency and accountability. The civic space must find a way to put the government to account, particularly in seeing how these policies can work. To a very large extent, there are some improvement in some level of micro business to business playing out, taking advantage of this continental free trade agreement. And the Director General of the World Trade Organization, our own dear Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, has been in the forefront using the principle of trade facilitation, which is one of the core mandates of the World Trade Organization, to see how this African Continental Free Trade Agreement can work successfully to promote trade, first and foremost, inter-African trade, then improve on our contribution of world trade, which is just about 3% or thereabout currently. Okay.
It's been a very educational episode today on SOUQ Pulse, and I want to say thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sam.
My pleasure, always.
Thank you. Yes, we want to say thank you for hanging in there. Remember, when it's our own, we should take it serious. We should ask questions. We should always demand better and make sure things work better. It's African Development Bank that has been on our front burner today on SOUQ Pulse, and we think we've answered some questions, and we talked about it to a certain degree. So for everyone out there, remember this nation, where you're coming from, where you're watching us from, we need to move forward. We need to get those businesses going, and we need to keep asking questions. My name is John-Rogers Chuks, and we will do this again tomorrow. Thank you. Have a nice evening.